Picture this. November 16th, 1957, a hardware store owner vanishes in broad daylight from a quiet Wisconsin town. When police arrive at the suspect's farmhouse that evening, they find something that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Hanging in a shed, dressed like a butchered deer, is the missing woman's body. But that's just the beginning. Inside the house, they discover lampshades made of human skin, bowls carved from skulls, and a vest stitched together from a woman's torso. This wasn't fiction, this was real, and the man responsible would inspire the most terrifying villains in horror history. I'm talking about Ed Gein. If you've ever been scared by Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, you've been scared by echoes of Ed Gein. He didn't have the highest body count in criminal history. In fact, he was only convicted of 2 murders. But what he did to his victims and what police found in his home made him one of the most disturbing figures in 20th century crime. His name became synonymous with the darkest corners of human psychology. A quiet farmer in rural Wisconsin who turned his isolated farmhouse into a chamber of horrors that still defies comprehension today. But behind the monster was a real person, shaped by circumstances we can examine, even if we can never fully understand or excuse what he became. Today, we're going to walk through Ed Gein's life from beginning to end. We'll look at the crimes, yes, but more importantly, we'll examine the psychology, the childhood trauma, and the warning signs that everyone missed. This is the true story of America's most infamous grave robber and murderer. Chapter 1. Childhood. Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. From the very beginning, his life was marked by dysfunction. His father, George, was an alcoholic who could barely hold down a job. But it was his mother, Augusta, who would shape Ed's psychology in ways that would eventually prove catastrophic. Augusta Gein was a religious fanatic in the truest sense. She saw sin everywhere, especially in women and sexuality. To her, the entire world outside her family was corrupt, evil, and dangerous, and she made sure her 2 sons, Ed and his older brother Henry, knew it. When Ed was young, Augusta moved the family to a remote farm near Plainfield, Wisconsin. This wasn't just about finding cheaper land. She wanted isolation. She wanted to keep her sons away from what she called the immoral influence of society. On that isolated farm, Augusta preached to her sons daily. Women, she told them, were all sinful and corrupt. All women except her, of course. Sex was dirty, shameful, disgusting. The outside world would destroy them if they let it in. Ed grew up with almost no contact with other children. When he tried to make friends at school, his mother punished him. Teachers later remembered him as a quiet, withdrawn boy who performed well academically, especially in reading, but who never seemed to connect with anyone. Other kids mocked him for a growth on his eyelid, and he retreated further into himself, into fantasy, into complete obedience to his mother's rigid worldview. This was a child being systematically isolated from normal human development. No friendships, no social skills, no understanding of healthy relationships, just his mother's voice, day after day, telling him that he was worthless, that women were evil, that the world was a place of sin and shame. Chapter 2. Deaths in the family. In 1940, Ed's father George died, leaving Augusta alone with her 2 sons on the struggling farm. The brothers took odd jobs around the area to support their mother and keep the property running, but something was changing in Henry, the older brother. He was starting to question their mother's influence. He criticized her harsh religiosity, her obsessive control, her emotional stranglehold on Ed. Then, on May 16, 1944, something happened that remains suspicious to this day. The brothers were burning brush near the farm when the fire grew out of control. Firefighters were called in. When they arrived, Ed reported that Henry was missing. A search party found Henry's body lying face down in an area that hadn't even been touched by the fire. Here's what makes this strange. Henry had bruises on his head. The circumstances of his death didn't quite add up, but the authorities at the time listed the cause as heart failure and never conducted a thorough investigation. Whether Ed played a role in his brother's death, we'll never know for certain. But from that moment on, Ed was alone with Augusta, the only person he would ever claim to love, the person who had spent his entire life breaking him down. Then came the event that would change everything. In late 1945, Augusta suffered a series of strokes. Ed cared for her as she declined, but eventually she died, leaving him completely and utterly alone on that isolated farm. Ed later described his mother as his best friend, the only person he ever loved. Despite everything she had done to him, the abuse, the control, the conditioning, he was devastated by her loss. And he did something telling. He sealed off the rooms she had used, preserving them exactly as she left them, like a shrine. The rest of the house slowly descended into filth and chaos, but Augusta's rooms remained untouched, frozen in time. Chapter 3: Descent into Darkness. After his mother's death, Ed Gein lived alone in that decaying farmhouse, cut off from any meaningful human connection. He survived on odd jobs, and the townspeople of Plainfield saw him as strange but harmless. They even hired him as a babysitter. They had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. At night, Ed read, but his reading material revealed a mind turning toward the macabre. Pulp magazines about anatomy, books about Nazi medical experiments, stories about grave robbing. Death had become his obsession. And then, sometime in the early 1950s, Ed crossed a line. He began visiting local cemeteries at night, guided by obituaries in the newspaper. He was looking for recently buried women who reminded him of his mother. He exhumed their bodies, brought them back to his farm, and there, in that isolated house, he dissected them. What he created from these corpses is almost too disturbing to describe. He made masks from facial skin, a belt from human nipples. He upholstered chairs with human skin. He fashioned bowls from skulls. And most disturbing of all, he created what he called a woman's suit, stitched together from tanned human skin, which he would wear around the house. Investigators later struggled to determine exactly how many graves he disturbed. Some graves in the Plainfield Cemetery were found open or tampered with. The sheer volume of human remains found in his house suggested multiple exhumations, but the exact number remains unknown. For years this went on. Ed Gein, the quiet bachelor who did odd jobs around town, was secretly living in a house of horrors, surrounded by the body parts of dead women, trying somehow to bring his mother back, or perhaps to become her. Chapter 4: The Murders. Chapter 5: Inside the Mind. So what was wrong with Ed Gein? What turns a person into this? After his arrest, psychiatrists evaluated him extensively. He was diagnosed with severe mental illness and deemed legally insane. Instead of prison, he was committed to a secure psychiatric institution where he would spend the rest of his life. The doctors noted signs of psychosis, disordered thinking, and a severely distorted perception of death and the human body. Ed told them he visited graves in a daze. He said that sometimes he believed the women he exhumed were almost alive. His boundary between life and death had completely dissolved. But the key to understanding Ed Gein lies in his relationship with his mother. Psychiatrists identified an intense, deeply disturbed attachment. Augusta had been the center of his universe, but she'd also been his abuser, his controller, the source of his shame and self-hatred. After her death, he seems to have tried to reconstruct her, to bring her back through the bodies of other women. The woman suit he created has been interpreted by some experts as an attempt to literally become his mother, to inhabit a female body and merge with her. This wasn't about gender identity in any modern sense. This was untreated psychosis, shaped by decades of abuse, repression, and shame, manifesting in the most grotesque way imaginable. Ed's emotional development had essentially stopped in childhood. He never learned to form normal relationships. He never developed an adult identity separate from his mother. Socially, he remained trapped, frozen, while his fantasies grew darker and more detached from reality. And here's what makes this case even more tragic. It was preventable. Ed showed warning signs for years. His obsession with death, his bizarre behavior, his extreme isolation. But this was rural Wisconsin in the 1940s and 50s. Mental health services barely existed. The community saw him as odd, but harmless. No one intervened. No one recognized the danger. And by the time they did, 2 women were dead, and at least 15 graves had been violated.
Chapter 6: Cultural Impact.
The Gein case shocked America. The media dubbed him the Plainfield Ghoul, and suddenly, this quiet Wisconsin town became synonymous with horror. But Ed Gein's influence didn't stop with newspaper headlines. He became a dark muse for artists and filmmakers. Robert Bloch, a writer who lived in Wisconsin, used elements of Gein's story for his novel Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock turned it into the legendary 1960 film featuring Norman Bates, the quiet motel owner with a dominating dead mother and a split personality. The parallels are unmistakable. A shy, boyish man devoted to his mother, hiding a monstrous inner life. In 1974, Tobe Hooper released The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, taking direct inspiration from Gein's use of human skin and bones as household items. Leatherface, the film's killer, wears masks made of human skin, just like Ed. And in The Silence of the Lambs, the character Buffalo Bill skins his victims to create a suit, a direct reference to Gein's woman suit. Ed Gein became a template, a prototype for fictional monsters across generations of horror. But here's the ethical question we have to ask. At what point does this become exploitation? When does examining a real killer's psychology turn into glorifying them? When do we forget that real people died, that real families suffered? The best works inspired by Gein use his story to explore trauma, mental illness, and the fragility of the human mind. The worst turn him into a spectacle, a source of entertainment, overshadowing the victims and the real human cost of his crimes. Conclusion. Ed Gein died in 1984 in a psychiatric hospital, having spent the last 27 years of his life institutionalized. He never stood trial for his crimes because he was found legally insane. His story is a collision of extreme psychological disturbance, childhood trauma, social isolation, and institutional failure. He wasn't a supernatural monster. He was a deeply damaged person whose warning signs were ignored until it was too late. Cases like this should serve as warnings, not legends. They show us the cost of untreated mental illness. They reveal what can happen when abuse and isolation go unchecked. They remind us to take disturbing behavior seriously, even when it comes from someone who seems harmless. But as we examine cases like Ed Gein's, we must never lose sight of the victims. Mary Hogan and Bernice Worden were real people with families and futures. The women whose graves he violated deserve to rest in peace. Any responsible examination of this story must focus on prevention, on understanding how to stop such tragedies before they happen, not on turning the killer into a dark icon. The healthiest way to engage with this case is to maintain moral distance. Recognize the horror, examine the psychology and the social failures, but refuse to glamorize or idolize the person at the center. Because the real lesson here isn't about Ed Gein. It's about recognizing the warning signs in our communities, supporting mental health care, and protecting the vulnerable before tragedy strikes. That's the story of Ed Gein, not a legend, not a movie villain, a real person whose crimes remind us that monsters aren't born in fiction. They're made in the real world, one failure at a time.